want to be clear about something before I start. I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy, or because I think anyone can help me. I'm telling you because last night, for the third time this week, my phone rang at 2 a.m., and on the other end was a voice I recognized asking a question I wasn't allowed to answer. And I need someone somewhere to know what's happening at the Crossfield fuel stop on Route 11, in case I'm not around to explain it later. I found the job listing on a physical index card pinned to the corkboard at a laundromat in Dalton, Virginia. This was about 14 months ago. The card was handwritten in blue ink. The penmanship careful and slightly old-fashioned. The kind of writing you see on letters from people who learned cursive before it stopped being mandatory. It read, "Night attendant needed, Crossfield fuel stop, Route 11. Cash pay. No experience required, must be comfortable alone." There was a phone number at the bottom. At the time, I was living out of my truck, a 2011 Silverado with 230,000 miles on it, a sleeping bag in the bed, and a duffel bag with everything I still owned. 6 months earlier, I'd been a GS-7 forestry technician with the U.S. Forest Service, stationed out of the Shawnee Hotshot crew in southern Illinois. Before that, I'd been the kind of person who thought he understood fire. Understood how it moved, how it breathed, how to read a ridgeline, and know which way the wind would push a flame front before the flame front knew itself. I was wrong about that. On August 14th, 2 years ago, I made a call on the Lick Creek fire that got 2 people killed. The official report called it a rapidly shifting wind event and classified it as an unavoidable fatality incident. That's what they told the families, that's what they told the press. But every person on that crew knew the truth, which was that I'd read the ridge wrong. I told the crew to hold position on a fire break when every piece of data, the humidity, the fuel load, the way the smoke was laying flat instead of rising, said to pull back. I was the senior sawyer. They listened to me. Tony Reeves and Danielle Okafor held their position because I told them to. And when the fire crowned and came downslope faster than any of us believed possible, they were on the wrong side of it. I made it out because I was 10 yards farther west. 10 yards. That's the distance between being the person who tells this story and being the person someone else tells a story about. I left the Forest Service 3 weeks after the funerals. I drove east because east was away from fire country, and I kept driving until I ran out of momentum in the hills of Western Virginia. I did odd jobs. I avoided people. I slept in my truck because motel rooms were too quiet and apartments require the kind of stability I wasn't capable of pretending to have. And then one morning in January, while my clothes were tumbling in a dryer that smelled like burnt fabric softener, I saw the index card. I called the number. A man answered on the second ring. His voice was unhurried, a deep Appalachian baritone, the kind of voice that sounds like it's been steeped in decades of wood smoke and patience. Crossfield fuel stop. I'm calling about the attendant position. You comfortable being alone at night? Yes. You got any prior commitments, family, second job, anything that pull you away on short notice? No. A pause. Then, can you get to the station by 5 this afternoon? I'll show you the setup before my shift ends. I asked for the address. He gave me coordinates instead. That should have been my first warning. The drive took about 40 minutes from Dalton south on Route 11 through country that got progressively less populated. The road was real. I could feel the asphalt under my tires. See it stretching ahead through winter bare hardwoods and brown pasture land. But somewhere around mile marker 38, the GPS on my phone lost its mind. The blue dot that represented my truck slid off the road and onto a blank green patch, where the map showed nothing but unincorporated forest. The route line disappeared entirely. I was driving on a road that my phone insisted didn't exist, toward a destination that wasn't on any map I could find. But the road was real. The yellow center line was freshly painted, and after another 3 miles of climbing through switchbacks I didn't remember seeing on any atlas, the trees opened up, and there it was. The Crossfield fuel stop looked like something out of 1987. 2 pump islands, 4 pumps total, the old kind with the mechanical number wheels instead of digital displays. A flat-roofed building with plate glass windows, a hand-lettered sign above the door, and a single sodium vapor light on a pole that cast the whole property in that sickly amber glow you only see in parking lots and bad dreams. Behind the station, a gravel lot ended abruptly at a tree line. A wall of Virginia pine and red oak that stood so close together their canopy formed an unbroken ceiling even without leaves. To the east and west, the road continued into curves that disappeared into the hills. A man was standing by the door when I pulled in. He was mid-60s, maybe older, with a raw-boned build and hands that looked like they'd been doing manual work since before I was born. He wore a canvas jacket and a John Deere cap that had been green once, and he was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not suspicious, exactly. Something closer to relief. "You the one who called?" he said. "Yes, sir. I'm Harlan Dupree. I run the day shift." He shook my hand. His grip was firm but brief, like he was checking something and got his answer. "Come inside, I'll walk you through it." The interior of the station was clean and spare. Shelved snacks, a cooler with drinks, a register that was at least 20 years old. A door at the back led to a stock room. Harlan showed me where the breaker panel was, where the cleaning supplies were kept, how to work the register, all normal. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a laminated card about the size of a postcard and set it on the counter in front of me. "These are the rules for the night shift," he said. "Read them now. Ask me questions if you have them. But understand, these aren't suggestions, these aren't guidelines. You follow every one of these every night without exception." I picked up the card. The text was printed, not handwritten, in plain black font on white laminate. There were 7 rules. Rule 1, keep the doors locked between midnight and 5 a.m. You may unlock them to let a paying customer in, but relock them immediately after the transaction. Rule 2, if the lights above pump 2 begin to flicker, go to the back room and count slowly to 200. Do not look out any window while you're counting. Rule 3, if a customer begins walking toward the tree line behind the station, lock all doors immediately. Do not go outside. Do not attempt to stop them. Do not call out to them. Rule 4, if someone calls the station and asks, "Is the station still here?" respond with "Yes, we're open," and hang up. Do not say anything else. Do not engage in conversation. Rule 5, the radio in the back room will occasionally pick up a signal that sounds like a person reading a list of names. Turn it off immediately. Do not listen for your own name. Rule 6, between 1 and 3 a.m., you may hear knocking from inside the supply closet. There is no one in the supply closet. Do not open it. Do not respond. Rule 7, if I do not arrive for the morning shift by 6:15 a.m., leave the station immediately. Drive east until you reach the interstate. Do not return without calling the number on the back of this card first. I read the list twice. Then I looked at Harlan, waiting for the punchline, or at least the explanation. He didn't offer either. "Is this serious?" I asked. "I've been running this station for 38 years, he said. "In that time, I've gone through 11 night attendants. The ones who followed the rules lasted. The ones who didn't." He didn't finish the sentence. He just looked at me with those pale blue eyes and let the silence fill in the blanks. "What happens if someone breaks Rule 3? I asked, because it was the one that bothered me most. The others were strange but abstract. Don't look, don't listen, don't open. Rule 3 was about a person, a real visible person walking away, and my instructions were to do nothing. Harlan's jaw tightened. "Nobody who's gone past that tree line has come back," he said. "And nobody who's gone after them has either." He left it at that. I took the job. The pay was $300 a night cash, which Harlan left in an envelope under the register at the start of each shift. For a man living in his truck, that was more than enough to not ask questions. My shift ran from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first few weeks were quiet in a way I hadn't experienced since the backcountry. The station got maybe 6 or 7 customers a night. Mostly long-haul truckers who looked as tired as the highway that brought them there. Plus the occasional local who seemed to know the station existed through some means other than maps or GPS. They'd pull in, pump their gas, sometimes buy a coffee or a bag of chips and leave. Nobody lingered. Nobody made small talk. It was like the station existed in a social dead zone where the normal human impulse to connect with strangers had been quietly switched off. I followed the rules, not because I believed in them, not at first, but because I'd spent 5 years in the fire service. And if that teaches you anything, it's that protocols exist because someone died in the absence of them. I didn't need to understand why Rule 2 existed, I just needed to follow it. The first time the lights above Pump 2 flickered, it was a Thursday night in late January, around 30 a.m. I was behind the register reading a paperback when the sodium light outside strobed twice and then started pulsing in an irregular rhythm, like a heartbeat with an arrhythmia. I put the book down, walked to the back room, closed the door, and started counting. 1, 2, 3. I kept my eyes on the cinder block wall across from me. 4, 5, 6. At around 40, I heard something outside. Not a car, not wind, a sound like someone dragging something heavy across the asphalt, slow and deliberate. At 60, it stopped. At 80, there was a single, sharp tap on the back room's exterior wall. The wall that faced the tree line, I kept counting. At 200, I opened the door, walked back to the register, and looked outside. The lights above Pump 2 were steady. The parking lot was empty. Nothing had changed, except that the air in the station felt denser, the way it does right before a storm system moves through, when the barometric pressure drops and your ears pop and everything feels slightly too close. The phone calls started in my third week. They came between midnight and 2 a.m., always from a number the caller ID displayed as a string of zeros I'd pick up, and a voice different every time. Male or female, young or old, would ask, "Is the station still here?" The first time, I almost responded naturally. Almost said something like, "Yeah, we're open. What can I help you with?" But I remembered Rule 4. I said yes, we're open, and hung up. The voice on the other end had sounded so relieved, just in that fraction of a second before I cut the connection, like someone who'd been lost and finally spotted a landmark. It made me uneasy in a way I couldn't articulate. The knocking from the supply closet started in February. It came precisely at 1:47 a.m., 3 nights in a row, then skipped 2 nights, then came back at 2:15 a.m. It sounded like knuckles on wood, a polite, almost tentative knock, the kind you'd use on a neighbor's door when you weren't sure they were home. The first night it happened, I stood in the middle of the station and stared at the closet door for a full minute. It was a standard hollow-core interior door, painted beige, with a simple lever handle. I could see the handle wasn't moving. The knocking came again, 3 raps, a pause, 2 more. I went back to the register and turned up the radio to cover the sound. Rule 6. There is no one in the supply closet. I believed that. I had to believe that, because the alternative was that there was someone inside a closet I had personally inventoried that afternoon and found empty. The radio in the back room was an old Grundig shortwave set, the kind that looked like it belonged in a Cold War listening post. It was already there when I started, sitting on a metal shelf between a case of motor oil and a box of paper towels. Most of the time it picked up nothing, just static across every band. But twice during my first month, I walked into the back room and found it on, tuned to a frequency I hadn't set, broadcasting a voice that was reading names. Not quickly, deliberately, with the careful enunciation of someone reading a roll call. The names were ordinary: David Parcher, Anna Louise Grimm, Thomas Whitfield, Rebecca Tan. But the cadence was wrong. There was no pause between names, no categorization, no context. Just an unbroken litany of names in a voice that sounded like it was being transmitted from somewhere very far away and very old. Both times I turned it off immediately. Both times I noticed my hand was shaking when I reached for the dial. I didn't recognize any of the names. I didn't want to find out what would happen if I did. Through all of this, the tree line remained the thing I thought about most. During my shift, I could see it from the register through the back window, a dark mass that started about 40 yards from the rear of the building, beyond the gravel lot. Even on clear nights with a visible moon, the trees back there held their darkness in a way that didn't make optical sense. Light reached them but didn't seem to return. I'd worked in forests for years, slept under canopy, hiked through old-growth timber so dense the noon sun barely filtered through. But those forests had depth. You could look into them and see layers, trunks, understory, gaps of light, the suggestion of distance. The tree line behind the Crossfield station was flat, like looking at a wall painted to look like a forest. Like the trees were the last thing that existed in that direction, and behind them was nothing at all. I never saw an animal near it. No deer, no raccoons, No possums waddling across the gravel. The tree line existed in a zone of biological silence that extended about 20 feet out from the first trunks. Even the weeds that grew in the gravel lot stopped short of it, as though the soil itself had been salted. I might have eventually convinced myself that all of this was explicable. Atmospheric phenomena, radio interference, an overactive imagination fed by a laminated card of strange instructions if it hadn't been for Dale. Dale Pressler was a long-haul driver who ran refrigerated freight between Roanoke and Knoxville. He started stopping at the station in early February, usually between 10 and 11 p.m. on his westbound runs, and he became the closest thing I had to a regular. He was in his 50s, stocky, with a graying beard and a laugh that came easily. He always bought the same thing, a large coffee and a pack of peanut butter crackers, and he always stayed for a few minutes to talk. Nothing deep. Football scores, weather complaints, a story about his daughter's softball team. The kind of conversation that exists just to prove that other people are real, that the world outside your windshield is populated by humans who care about ordinary things. I liked Dale. That's important to say, because what happened to him is the reason I eventually broke the only rule that mattered. And I need you to understand that it wasn't abstract for me. It wasn't a stranger. It was a man who knew my coffee order and once spent 10 minutes telling me about the best biscuits and gravy he'd ever eaten at a truck stop in Jellicoe, Tennessee. It was a Tuesday night in early March. Dale pulled in at his usual time, topped off his tank, and came inside. We talked for a while. He seemed normal, tired, like always, but lucid and cheerful. He bought his coffee and his crackers. He said goodnight. He walked out to his truck, and then he didn't get in. I was watching through the front window, the way I always did when a customer left, making sure they pulled out safely. Dale walked past the driver's side door of his Freightliner without looking at it. He walked past the pump island. He walked across the lot, past the edge of the building, and onto the gravel behind the station. He was heading for the tree line. My first instinct was to shout. I took a breath, opened my mouth, and then I looked down at the laminated card on the counter. Rule 3. Do not go outside. Do not attempt to stop them. Do not call out to them. Dale was moving at a normal walking pace, not hurrying, not stumbling. His arms hung at his sides and his head was up, like a man walking towards something he recognized, something he expected to find. I locked the front door, then the back. I stood at the rear window and watched Dale Pressler walk across the gravel lot, through the dead zone where nothing grew, and into the tree line. The darkness took him in stages. His boots disappeared first, then his legs, then his torso, and finally his cap. He never turned around. He never hesitated. I stood at that window for a long time. I'm not sure how long. At some point, I noticed that my hands were gripping the windowsill hard enough to leave marks in the old wood, and that I was holding my breath. I exhaled. I unlocked the doors. I went back to the register and sat down and stared at the wall until 6:15, when Harlan arrived. Something happened last night. I said one of my regulars, a trucker named Dale. He walked into the trees. Harlan looked at me, not with surprise, not with alarm, with the flat, resigned expression of a man hearing something he'd heard before. Don't know anybody named Dale, he said. He's been coming in 3 times a week since February. He drives a white Freightliner with Tennessee plates. Harlan glanced out the front window. The lot was empty. There was no Freightliner. There were no tire tracks from a Freightliner. There was no coffee cup in the trash where I'd watched Dale throw his away 4 hours ago. Get some sleep, Harlan said. You look rough. I drove back to Dalton and sat in my truck in the laundromat parking lot and tried to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe Dale was a construct, a figment born from isolation and weird hours and the cumulative weight of living in a place that operated by rules I didn't understand. Maybe I'd been dreaming with my eyes open. That happens. Sleep deprivation does things, grief does things. I'd been carrying Tony and Danielle for 2 years. Maybe my brain had finally started manufacturing people to fill the silence, and then taking them away again, just to prove it could still hurt me. I almost believed it. For about 3 weeks, I almost had myself convinced. The station was quiet during that stretch. No flickering lights, no phone calls, no knocking. Just long, still nights and the occasional customer and the hum of the cooler and the distant sound of trucks on the highway above. I started sleeping better. I started thinking about maybe renting a room somewhere, getting out of the truck. Normal thoughts. The kind of thoughts that belong to a person who lives in the real world. Then I found the closet. Not the supply closet, the other one. A narrow door in the back room that I'd assumed was an electrical panel. It wasn't locked, just stuck. The frame swollen from years of humidity. I'd been looking for extra paper towels when I shouldered it open, and found myself staring into a space about 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide, lined with wooden shelves. On the shelves were personal effects. A man's wallet, brown leather, containing a Virginia driver's license issued to someone named Gerald Mooney, with an address in Blacksburg. A set of car keys on a keychain shaped like a fish. A woman's wristwatch stopped at 317. A cell phone so old it had a physical antenna. A pair of work boots, size 11, with red clay, dried into the treads. A flannel shirt folded neatly. A wedding ring. And on the bottom shelf, stacked in a row like library books, were laminated cards. I counted 9 of them. Each one was a version of the rules I'd been given. But they weren't identical. The core rules were the same. Rule 3 was always there. Always the same wording. But the peripheral rules shifted. One card didn't mention the radio. Another had an 8th rule I'd never seen. If you see yourself standing outside the front door, do not make eye contact. Wait for it to leave. A third had Rule 5 crossed out with a marker and replaced with handwriting that said, "Too late for this one." The last card in the row had been flipped over on the back, in small, cramped handwriting that pressed hard enough to score the laminate. Someone had written, "The rules change because it learns. We think the rules protect us from it, but what if the rules are how it trains us?" I put everything back. I closed the closet. I went back to the register and sat there until morning, turning that sentence over in my mind. The rules change because it learns. I thought about Dale walking into the trees with the calm certainty of a man going home. I thought about Rule 3, the insistence that I do nothing, absolutely nothing, while a person walks toward whatever waits in that tree line. And I wondered for the first time whether the rules existed to keep me safe or to keep me still. I didn't ask Harlan about the closet. I didn't ask him about the previous employees. I was afraid that if I did, he'd look at me with that same flat expression and tell me he didn't know what I was talking about. That the closet had always been empty, that there had never been anyone before me. And I was more afraid of that of the erasure, the casual deletion of people who'd existed and worked and left their belongings behind, than I was of anything in the trees. April came, the nights got warm. I settled back into the routine and tried not to think too hard about the closet or the cards or the handwritten warning on the back of the last one. I was managing. I was functional. I followed the rules and collected my cash and slept in my truck and ate at the diner in Dalton and existed in the narrow space between denial and understanding. It wasn't a good life, but it was a life, and after the fire, I'd stopped expecting more than that. And then Meg showed up. Megan Torres was the person I'd been closest to in the Forest Service. She'd been the crew superintendent on Shawnee, the one who'd argued at the review board that the wind shift was unpredictable, who'd written statements defending my judgment even though we both knew my judgment was exactly what I'd failed. After I left, she'd called me every week for 2 months. I'd stopped answering. She'd sent texts that I'd read and not responded to. Eventually the texts had stopped, and I'd told myself that was for the best, because Meg deserved better than being tethered to a man who'd gotten her people killed. She pulled into the station at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday in mid-April, driving a green Subaru Outback with Illinois plates and a Shawnee Hotshot sticker on the rear window. I recognized the car before I recognized her. When she walked through the door, I felt something crack in my chest that I hadn't realized was still intact. "You are extremely hard to find," she said. She looked the same. Short, dark hair, weathered face, the compact build of someone who'd spent years carrying a Pulaski uphill. She was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, and she looked furious and relieved in equal measure. "Meg, how did you? I've been looking for you for 5 months. Your phone's disconnected. You dropped off every database I could search." I was driving back east from a conference in Charlottesville, and I saw this place from the highway, and I had a feeling. She looked around the station. What is this place? It's not on any map. It's a gas station. It's not on any map, she repeated. Like I hadn't heard her. I pulled off at a junction I've never noticed before, and the road just brought me here. My GPS says I'm in the middle of a national forest. Meg, you need to leave. She stared at me. I drove 500 miles to find you. I'm not leaving. We talked, or rather she talked, and I listened. Because Meg had always been better at words than me, and because everything she was saying that she'd been worried that the crew missed me, that what happened on Lick Creek wasn't the simple binary of right and wrong that I'd made it into, was stuff I'd needed to hear for 2 years and hadn't let myself. She sat on the counter and drank the bad station coffee and told me about the new crew members and the controlled burns they'd done in the fall and the way Tony's daughter had started at the community college in Carbondale. She was trying to bring me back. I could feel it, the pull of the life I'd abandoned. The warmth of being known by someone who'd seen me at my worst and hadn't left. But the whole time she was talking, I was watching her eyes, because every few minutes Meg's gaze would drift past me, past the register, through the back window to where the tree line sat in its impenetrable dark. She'd lose the thread of her sentence for just a moment, a half-second pause, a slight unfocusing of her pupils, and then snap back and continue like nothing had happened. She didn't seem aware she was doing it. Meg, I said during one of these pauses, when you drove in, did you see the trees behind the station? Yeah. Big stand of pines or something. Another pause. Her eyes drifted again. They're really dark, aren't they? I need you to not look at them. She frowned. What? The trees. Don't look at them, look at me. She laughed. But it was an uncertain laugh. You've been out here too long. You're going full hermit on me. I didn't argue. I made more coffee. I told her there was a motel in Dalton, 25 minutes east, and that she should head there and get some sleep, and we could talk more in the morning. She agreed reluctantly, and I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. She was going to leave. She was going to drive east, away from this place. And tomorrow I'd meet her in Dalton like a normal person, and we'd figure out whatever came next. She hugged me at the door. It was brief and fierce, and it smelled like campfire, the way she always did. Even when there was no fire, like she'd absorbed so much smoke over the years that it had become part of her chemistry. I hugged her back, and for a moment I forgot where I was. Get some rest, she said. You look like hell. Drive safe. She walked out. I watched through the window. She walked toward her Subaru. She reached the driver's side door. Her hand went to the handle and stopped. Her head turned slowly, like a compass needle finding north. She was looking at the tree line.
No.
I said it out loud, to no one, to the empty station, to the God I'd stopped believing in on a hillside in southern Illinois. No. No. Meg's hand dropped from the car door. She took a step. Then another. She was walking around the back of the station, past the gravel toward the trees. Her pace was the same as Dale's, unhurried, certain. The walk of someone who sees something you don't. I grabbed the laminated card. Rule 3. If a customer begins walking toward the tree line behind the station, lock all doors immediately. Do not go outside. Do not attempt to stop them. Do not call out to them. I looked at the card. I looked at Meg, who was 20 yards from the tree line and closing. I thought about the 9 cards in the closet, the belongings of 11 people who'd worked here before me, and the handwritten note, the rules change because it learns. Then I thought about Tony and Danielle, who died because I told them to hold position instead of pulling back, who died because I trusted protocol and my own reading of the situation over the evidence that was screaming at me to move. I'd followed my gut then, and people died. Every night since, I'd been following the rules to make sure it never happened again. But the last time I held still while people walked into danger, I'd buried 2 friends. I put the card down. I unlocked the front door. I grabbed the heavy Maglite flashlight from under the counter, and I went outside. The air hit me like a wall. Not cold, it was April. The nights were mild but thick, pressurized. The same barometric density I'd felt after the Pump 2 incidents, but amplified, concentrated. like the atmosphere itself was resisting my movement. Every step across the gravel felt like wading through knee-deep water. Behind me, the station's sodium light flickered once and then stabilized as if deciding whether to let me go. Meg was 10 yards from the tree line. I could see her back, the green plaid of her flannel, her boots crunching on gravel that gave way to bare dirt. She wasn't running, she wasn't being dragged. She was walking toward those trees the way you walk toward someone you haven't seen in years. "Meg," I shouted. My voice came out flat, swallowed by the air before it could carry. She didn't turn. I didn't know if she couldn't hear me or chose not to. I ran. The pressure fought me, but I'm a big person and I've spent years moving fast over bad terrain, and I closed the distance in seconds. I reached the edge of the gravel, the dead zone where nothing grew, and for a moment my body rebelled. Every survival instinct I'd ever developed screaming at me to stop, to turn around, to go back to the counter and lock the doors, and follow the rule that had been keeping me alive for 3 months. The last time you trusted yourself over the protocol, people died. But the last time I held still, a man named Dale walked into the dark, and nobody remembered him. Meg crossed the tree line. The darkness folded around her. I was 2 steps behind. The transition was instantaneous. One moment I was in the gravel lot behind the Crossfield station with the sodium light painting, everything amber. The next, I was somewhere else. The trees were the same Virginia pines, the same red oaks, but they were wrong. The bark was too smooth, like skin. The branches didn't move, even though I could feel something that wasn't wind pressing against my face. The ground underfoot was soft, and not with leaf litter, but with something that gave like packed sand on a beach. And it was warm. The ground was warm, as though something underneath it was generating heat. I turned on the mag light. The beam hit the trees and stopped. It didn't penetrate. The light reached the nearest trunk, and it just ended. Like the darkness beyond it was a solid thing that photons couldn't move through. I could see maybe 15 feet in any direction. Beyond that, nothing. Meg was ahead of me. I could hear her footsteps, that steady, unhurried pace, somewhere in the dark beyond my light's reach. I followed the sound, pushing through the trees, and after what felt like 100 yards, but might have been 10, the forest opened up. I stepped out of the tree line and into a clearing, and what I saw there stopped me dead. It was the gas station, the Crossfield fuel stop, sitting in a clearing in the woods, lit by its own sodium light, pumps gleaming, windows bright, identical in every detail to the station I just left, except that everything was reversed. The sign was mirrored. The pump numbers ran right to left, the door hinges were on the wrong side. It was the station seen in a reflection, built solid and real and sitting in a place where no station should be. And it was occupied. There were people inside. I could see them through the windows, moving behind the counter, browsing the shelves. Through the plate glass I counted 4, 5, 6 figures, all behaving the way normal customers behave in a normal gas station, picking up items, checking prices, waiting in line. And behind the register, wearing a canvas jacket and a faded cap, was Dale. He was smiling. He was working the register with the easy competence of someone who'd been doing it for years. He made change, he bagged items, he chatted with a woman who was buying a pack of cigarettes. He looked comfortable, he looked like he belonged there. Meg was walking toward the mirrored station's front door. She was almost there, Meg. I shouted again, and this time the sound carried. She slowed, not stopped, slowed, like my voice had reached her through water, arriving muffled and delayed. One of the figures inside the station looked up. Then another. Dale stopped making change and stared through the window directly at me. His expression changed. The smile didn't disappear. It stretched. It widened past the boundaries of what a human smile should occupy, pulling at the corners of his face until it was less an expression than a deformation. The other figures in the station turned, one by one, and they were all smiling the same way, and their eyes were all fixed on the same point. On me, I felt it then. The attention. It wasn't coming from the people in the mirrored station. They were just the surface, the interface. It was coming from everywhere. From the warm ground beneath my feet, from the darkness in the trees, from the air itself. Something vast and impersonal had become aware of me, and its awareness felt like standing in the path of a searchlight the size of a continent. It didn't feel malicious, it felt curious. The way you might feel curious about an ant that had crawled into your house through a crack you hadn't noticed. It wanted to know how I'd gotten in. It wanted to know if I'd stay. Meg was at the door, her hand was on the handle. Inside, the figures were waiting for her, still smiling, still watching me. I understood with a clarity that felt like frostbite, that if she walked through that door, she would become one of them. She'd work the register or browse the shelves or stand by the pumps, and she'd do it forever. And she'd never know that anything was wrong. She'd be happy. She'd be Dale, making change and telling stories about biscuits and gravy, in a gas station that existed inside a darkness that should not have had an inside. I covered the distance between us in 4 strides. I grabbed Meg's arm and pulled. She resisted, not physically. Not like she was fighting me, but with a kind of inertia, as though the air around her had thickened into something adhesive. I pulled harder. I'm not a gentle person when the situation doesn't call for it, and this situation called for nothing resembling gentleness. I yanked her away from the door with both hands, wrapped my arms around her, and hauled her backward. The figures inside the station pressed against the glass. They didn't move toward the door. They didn't try to come out. They just watched with those impossible smiles as I dragged Meg across the clearing and back into the tree line. The attention followed us. I could feel it like heat on my back. That vast, impersonal regard, tracking our movement through the trees. The warm ground pulsed under my feet. The branches seemed to lean inward, not blocking our path but observing it. The way a doctor watches a patient walk across a room to assess their gait. I kept moving. I kept Meg's arm locked in mine. She was stumbling now, her coordination failing, like she was being pulled in 2 directions by forces her body couldn't reconcile. We broke through the tree line. The gravel lot materialized around us. Real gravel, real night air. The real station sitting ahead with its light flickering steadily. I dragged Meg across the lot and through the front door and locked it behind us. She collapsed on the floor near the register, and I knelt beside her with the mag light still clutched in one hand, and my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. She was breathing. Her eyes were closed. Her face was pale but intact, normal, unsmiling. After about 2 minutes, she opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression of pure confusion. "What happened?" she said. I was going to my car. Did I pass out? Something like that. My head hurts. I know. Can you stand? She could. I got her into my truck, drove her to the motel in Dalton, checked her in, and sat with her until she fell asleep. She didn't remember the trees. She didn't remember the mirrored station. She thought she'd fainted in the parking lot and I'd caught her. And I didn't correct her because what would I have said? I saw a copy of my gas station in a hole in the world, and our friend Dale lives there now with a smile that doesn't fit his face. She would have called an ambulance for me, not for her. I drove back to the station. It was 3:40 a.m. Harlan was there, which was wrong. Harlan never came before 6. He was sitting on the bench outside the front door, and when I pulled in, he stood up with the slow, deliberate movement of a man whose joints had been carrying too much weight for too many years. He looked old. Not 60-something old. Ancient. The skin on his face hung loose, and his eyes were sunken, and the hand that he raised in greeting was mottled with age spots I'd never noticed before. He looked like a man who'd aged a decade in 4 hours. "You went in," he said. Not a question. Meg was walking toward it. I couldn't let her. I know. He lowered himself back onto the bench. "I know why you did it. Same reason I did, 40 years ago. Same reason everyone does." He paused, coughed, looked at the tree line. "My wife, Helen. She came to visit me one night. 3rd month I was working here. I hadn't told her about the trees. Hadn't told her about any of it. She went out for a cigarette and she started walking. You went after her. I went after her. I brought her back. She didn't remember any of it." He coughed again. "But I saw what's in there. And I felt it see me. And after that, the boundary was thinner. Where I'd gone through it was thinner, like I'd worn a path." "What is it?" I asked. "What's behind the trees?" Harlan was quiet for a long time. The station's light buzzed above us. This station's been here since 1937, he said. Before that, it was a trading post. Before that, a way station. Before that, just a marker on a trail. There's always been something here, at this spot. Something that keeps the boundary solid. You understand the station isn't the thing that's wrong. The station is what keeps the wrong thing from spreading. It's an anchor. As long as someone's here, minding it, following the protocols, the boundary holds. The trees stay where the trees are. The other side stays on the other side, and the people who walk in, they hear something, or see something, or feel something that tells them to cross. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's different for each person. I only know that the rules are how we keep the boundary from unraveling. And every time someone crosses over and comes back, he looked at me. Every time it gets a little thinner, a little easier for things to bleed through. You felt it when you came back, the air, the pressure. I had felt it, the atmosphere around the station had changed, the silence was deeper. The tree line looked closer, though I couldn't have told you whether it had actually moved or whether my perception of distance had shifted. The darkness in those trees was darker now. How many times can someone cross before it breaks, I asked. I don't know. I crossed once, 40 years ago. I've spent every day since then holding this place together. He stood up again, unsteady, bracing himself on the bench. I was going to sell this station next year. Retire. Maybe go to Florida. See if my knees work better in the heat. He smiled. And it was a tired smile, and it had nothing behind it except exhaustion. Guess that's not happening now. Why not? Because you crossed, and now you've seen it, and now it knows you. You can feel it, can't you? Right now at the back of your head. Like someone's watching you from a room you can't see. I could feel it. I'd been feeling it since we came back through the trees. A presence, not hostile, not threatening, but attentive, like being in a house that was listening. The station needs someone who understands, Harlan said. It's always needed that. Someone who knows what's behind the trees and chooses to stay anyway. The rules work better when the person following them knows why. You never told me why, because if I'd told you on your first day, you'd have left. And if I'd told you after a month, you'd have thought I was crazy. The only way you learn why the rules matter is by seeing what happens when they break. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a set of keys, the station keys, the ones I'd seen him use every morning. He held them out to me. I'm not telling you to stay. I'm telling you that someone has to. I took the keys. Not because Harlan told me to. Not because I was following orders or deferring to authority or doing what I was trained to do. I took them because 26 months ago, 2 people died because I made the wrong call. And I'd spent every day since then running from the kind of responsibility that comes with being the person who decides. And here, in this impossible gas station on a road that didn't exist, the decision was simple in a way that nothing in my life had been simple since Lick Creek. Stay and hold the line. Or leave and let the boundary dissolve. I knew what I was choosing. I knew the cost. The thing behind the trees knew my name now, and it would keep watching, and the boundary was thinner than it had been before I crossed. But someone had to stand at the anchor point. Someone had to follow the rules, not blindly, not out of obedience, but with full knowledge of what they held back. Harlan left that morning. He shook my hand at the door. The same brief, firm grip as the first time. And he got into his truck and drove east without looking back. I haven't seen him since. I don't know if he made it to Florida. I don't know if his knees feel better in the heat. I hope so. He earned it. That was 3 months ago. I run both shifts now. I sleep in 2-hour stretches in the back room, on a cot I bought from the Army surplus store in Dalton. I've learned things Harlan never taught me. Things the station itself seems to communicate. If you're paying attention, the flickering on pump 2 happens more often now, and the counting takes longer. The knocking from the supply closet has gotten louder, more insistent, less like a neighbor, and more like someone who knows you're home and is losing patience. The radio picks up the name frequency almost every night. I turn it off every time. But last week I was slow, and I heard a name I recognized, a woman from the Lick Creek fire crew. Someone who's still alive as far as I know. I don't know what it means that her name is on that list. I don't want to know. I've made my own additions to the laminated card. Rule 8. If you see headlights on the road at exactly 3:33 a.m., turn off all interior lights and wait. The car will pass. It is not looking for you specifically, but it will stop if it sees you. Rule 9. The tree line is closer than it was. I've measured it. It moves about 6 inches per month. I estimate I have 11 years before it reaches the back wall of the building. I try not to think about Rule 9 too often. The reason I'm writing this now, the reason I started by telling you about the phone calls, is because of Meg. I put her in the motel in Dalton that night, and I called her the next morning and told her I was fine. That the gas station was just a job, that I'd keep in touch this time. She drove back to Illinois. She texted me every few days. Normal texts, normal Meg. Photos of her dog, complaints about budget meetings, links to articles she thought I'd find interesting. For 2 months, everything seemed okay. Then last Tuesday, my phone rang at 2:07 a.m. I picked it up. The caller ID showed Meg's number. "Is the station still here?" she asked. My blood went cold. Not the cliche kind of cold. The real kind. The kind where your peripheral circulation shuts down and your fingers go numb, and your body starts triaging its resources, because it's detected a threat it can't outrun. I gripped the phone, and I heard my own voice, steady and mechanical, deliver the response I'd been trained to give. "Yes, we're open." I hung up. I stood behind the register and stared at the phone in my hand and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Meg had asked the question. The specific question, word for word, that strangers had been asking since my first week. The question that Rule 4 existed to contain. She called again the next night. Same time, same question. "Is the station still here?" I gave the same answer. I hung up. Last night, she called again. But this time, before I could respond, she said something else. "I can see it from the highway, the light. It's so bright, I'm pulling off now." And then the line went dead. I walked to the front window and looked out at the road. It was empty. No headlights, no green Subaru. Just the black asphalt and the trees and the silence. But here's what scares me. What actually genuinely scares me in a way that the mirrored station and the smiling figures and the vast attention behind the trees never quite managed. I checked my phone this morning. I looked at my recent calls. The 3 calls from Meg's number were there, timestamped real. But when I called her back, the Meg who answered sounded fine. Normal. Confused about why I was calling at 7 a.m. She said she'd been asleep all night. She said she hadn't called anyone. I asked if she'd been thinking about the station. There was a pause. A long pause. "It's funny you asked that," she said. "I've been having these dreams about a gas station. I can't remember where it is, but I know how to get there. I keep dreaming about the road." I told her not to drive anywhere for a while. I told her I'd come visit her instead, that we'd get dinner somewhere in Illinois, somewhere far from Virginia and Route 11 and whatever is anchored underneath this place. She laughed and said that sounded nice. I'm going to drive to Illinois and sit across from her in a restaurant and look at her face and make sure her smile is the right size for her face. I'll be gone for 2 days, maybe 3. The station will be empty while I'm away. I know what that means. I know the rules say someone has to be here. I know the boundary is thinner than it's ever been. And I know the tree line crept another 3 inches last week. And I know the knocking from the supply closet has started happening during the day. Now, not just at night. I know all of this, but Meg is driving towards something she can't see yet. And I'm not going to sit behind this counter and hold still while someone I love walks into the dark. I did that once, I won't do it again. If you're reading this and you're the person who found this taped to the register at the Crossfield fuel stop on Route 11, I need you to understand something. The laminated card is under the counter. The rules are real, follow them. But if someone you care about starts walking toward the trees, I can't tell you what to do. I'm the last person in the world qualified to give that advice. I broke Rule 3, and I'd break it again tonight, and I'll break it every time until whatever's behind the tree line finally decides that the crack I've made is wide enough to come through. The station is still here, for now. I just checked the back window. The tree line is closer than it was this morning. And for the first time since I've worked here, I can see something moving between the trunks, not walking, standing, just inside the first row of trees. It's shaped like a person. It's smiling. I think it's waving at me.